Okay, we are good to go. Alexander, how are you?
I'm very well. Obviously, following the news, this is a pivotal moment in history, and obviously, it's a privilege in some ways to cover it. It's also, I have to say, there's a massive burden because there is so much news pouring out. There's a famous quote from someone who said once that, sometimes history stops for 10 years and then you get 10 years of history in 1 week. And it seems to be that we're very much in the last scenario, but there we go. I'm very well and very happy to be here on the Duran today talking about these things.
All right. So welcome everybody on Odyssey. Welcome to everybody who's watching us on Rumble. And of course, to our great community on Locals and to everyone here on YouTube as well. And thank you, Valley S, for that super chat. And to all our moderators, Valley S, Zarael, Alan Watson, Reckless Abandon, GEC Cosmic Rain, Spartan Warrior Queen. Did I miss anybody? I don't know if I missed somebody. Hopefully not. But thank you. Thank you very much to all our moderators. And Alexander, let's jump into it. What we're going to do is we'll go for about an hour, maybe an hour, 15 minutes, because tonight, Alexander, what is the time, London time that you have?
It's 1900 hours London time, 1400 hours Eastern Standard Time. I do my regular live stream every Wednesday on Locals. So you can join me then, you can put questions. And in fact, it's a good way of doing this because we can do the live stream today, get the discussion going, and then we can start do questions on Locals this evening for me, this afternoon for people in the US. I'm not going to guess everywhere else, wherever they are.
Yeah. Okay. So definitely theduran.locals.com. Alexander, I mean, he just jumps right into answering questions, really. And any questions that he doesn't get to answer, because we only have an hour and a half on Locals to live stream, anything that he doesn't get a chance to answer during that live stream, Alexander actually answers everything afterwards. And we put it up on Locals as well. So, I mean, he just gets all the questions knocked out. And, I encourage everyone to plug into your, essentially what is a Q&A session.
It's a Q&A
really, really
session.
sharp. Really sharp. And I'm also there listening in. And there was a time when I used to ask questions, but now there's so many people that I just kind of sit back and I don't ask questions at all. So, all right. So theduran.locals.com. Alexander will be live there as well. We'll try to answer whatever questions we can in this live, but if we don't get to them, rest assured, we'll gather them up and we'll answer them in a video. Next day, let's jump into it, Alexander. I am going to read you an excerpt from an article from M.K. Badrakumar, who's an Indian diplomat, an excellent journalist, an excellent analyst. This article, and I'll put a link for it in the chat as well, so everyone can read it. It does an excellent job in explaining what is going on right now between Russia and Ukraine. Actually, he confirms much of what we have been saying and what you have outlined over the past, say, week. And I think you were the first person that actually understood the Russian strategy. Unfortunately, the U.S. mainstream media and all of these pundits, they're still stuck in their shock and awe thinking, and they're perplexed as to what Russia is doing. But you've understood it. I would like to say that the Dr. Steve Turley has understood it. Robert Barnes has understood it. So there's a lot of great thinkers out there and great analysts that have a grasp as to what Russia is doing with regards to Ukraine on the military side and on the diplomatic side. And you can't separate the two. So let me read you this excerpt. Let me share my screen and see if I can get it up for everybody as well as I read this excerpt. It's about 2 paragraphs. But 1 second, Alexander. Give me 1 second. And where is that article here? Okay, here we go. So I'm going to share my screen. Do you see it?
Yep.
Yes.
I see it.
Great. So this is what this article says. The Ukrainian side realizes that the Russian strategy is winning as Russian forces are encircling Kiev from the northwest, west, and east. Black Sea ports are no longer accessible, and the forces in the east are entrapped. Yesterday, Zelensky acknowledged the grim situation. After the 3rd round in Belarus, he hastened to assure that talks will continue until a settlement. In his words, quote, "Today, the 3rd round of negotiations took place in Belarus, and I would like to say the 3rd and final one, but we are realists. Therefore, we will talk. We will insist on negotiations until we find a way to tell our people this is how we will come to peace, end quote. Russians are in no tearing hurry. They
No.
eschew triumphalism and instead allow enough space for the Ukrainian side to take some really hard decisions on surrender. While military pressure is kept up on Kiev, Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said yesterday, quote, "We keep the door open to diplomatic options. As soon as there are corresponding signals, we will be acting on them," end quote. Alexander, your thoughts on this excerpt?
That's exactly. Badra Kuma's got it exactly right. And as you rightly said, it echoes what we've been saying in our live streams, in our analytical videos here on the Duran for a long, long time. People are making the mistake of analyzing this or describing this war as if it was the US that was conducting it. And of course, it is not the US that is conducting this war. It is Russia. And they conduct the war in a completely different way. Now, their purpose is to achieve a comprehensive settlement in Ukraine, which will endure. And they need to retain a political structure, or they want to try and retain as much as possible of a political structure in Ukraine so that they can do a deal with it and they can use that political structure to help them pacify the country. And obviously, very much on their terms. Now, they did that in Chechnya, they did that in Syria, and they're doing that again in Ukraine. That is contrast to the situation with the US, which went into Afghanistan, went into Iraq, went into Syria, obliterated the political structures which existed there, and instead of achieving peace in those countries, found itself facing a chaotic situation which ended up being disastrous from the perspective of the United States. So it's politics, it's war. The Russian way is war as an extension of politics. It's the theories of Clausewitz. The Russian military is very imbued with the thinking of Clausewitz. This I happen to know, by the way. I mean, this isn't something I'm saying, because it looks to me as if it's the way. I've talked to people who are involved in academies, and partly the reason, Russian academies, and partly the reason for this is that one person who was heavily influenced by Clausewitz, and who was the leading Marxist thinker on war, was Friedrich Engels, who was, of course, German, and he based his ideas on Clausewitz. So Engels transmitted Clausewitz thinking to Germany, to Russia, and, of course, the Russians, now that, Marxism is out of the way, well, they've gone back to Clausewitz. There is another factor, which I just want to quickly add as a historical piece, which is, of course, that Clausewitz himself, for much of his military career, was an officer in the Russian army. So it could also be the case that Clausewitz's thinking is influenced by what was already traditional Russian thinking. But it's war as an extension of politics. Diplomacy and combat go hand in hand. Just imagine if in 2001, the United States had been negotiating with the Taliban simultaneously with its war against Afghanistan, or in 2003, if the United States had been negotiating simultaneously whilst with Saddam Hussein as it invaded Iraq. That's what the Russians are doing. We're now going to have a meeting in Turkey very soon between the Russian and Ukrainian foreign ministers, and we'll see that there was a big interview that Zelensky gave to, I think it was ABC, in which he said that, NATO, Ukraine accepts that NATO NATO membership is not really an option for Ukraine, and that also they will try and find or look for ways to come to some kind of negotiated agreement about the status of Donbass and Crimea. Can I say you mustn't place any reliance at all on what Zelensky says. Zelensky says lots of things every day. He says sometimes very belligerent things. Sometimes he says very conciliatory things. But the very fact that he's talking about these things at all suggests, perhaps gives some indication of the way things are moving on the ground. and the fact that we've had humanitarian corridors being established, which again, let me stress, was a Russian initiative. It was, it was, again, the media in the West is not reporting this correctly. So the Russians who originally proposed the setting up of humanitarian corridors, just as they did in Syria. By the way, it seems they did the same thing in Chechnya as well. So the Ukrainians have eventually, very grudgingly, come round to this idea. So eventually, sooner or later, they will come round to the political conditions as well. So you will have a month, 2 months, who knows, of war, but not perhaps as intense as some of the wars that US fights. But then you will have peace. Whereas what the US does is you have 3-4 weeks, 2 months maybe of war, and then peace doesn't come. You have more war still, and that goes on for years, and there's never any kind of real resolution until the US eventually leaves and chaos is left behind. So that's the difference.
Excellent. And that's an excellent summary, Alexander. Lady Cosmica, is that you, Cosmic Rain, moderating? Yeah. It's good to have you here. And let's switch gears and let's talk about Biden's speech and the EU speech, Timmermans as well, who talked about the EU becoming energy independent in a year and Biden, banning all Russian energy. And let's talk about that. And for that, Alexander, we have you, and we also have a special guest. Tom, I am going to bring you in. Yeah. Mr. Tom Luongo. This is the first time we meet, by the way, but I know you.
Absolutely. And a great pleasure to have you on the
Your mic, Tom. Your mic. We can't hear you.
We can't hear you. We can't hear you.
Tom,
we can't hear you.
Oh, good morning. Sorry, I had myself on mute so that I didn't screw up your thing. Alex, I'm putting you on notice, dude. I've been trying to get you on my podcast for months now. I'm shaming you publicly. You need to come on so we can, you and I can just have a sit down and have a chat whenever you can get a chance. So, but I'm glad. Thank you for the invite as always.
And it's enjoyed to have you on the Duran.
It's great to have you on here. Real quick before both of you guys get into the economics of all of this. Tom, where can people find you? How can they reach out to you?
Sure. You can follow me on my blog at tomluongo.me, which is named Gold, Goats, and Guns. You can follow me on Twitter at TFL1728. I've got an Odyssey channel now as well, and I've deprecated my YouTube channel, as well as I do have a Telegram channel, but it's mostly for people to sit and chat. And for me to throw stuff out there. I'm a Telegram noob, so don't expect much. But there it is. If you need to get a hold of me, those are the ways you can do so. And of course, you can sign up for the Patreon over Patreon/Gold, Goats, and Guns for the private reports and the private blog posts and the monthly investment newsletter. That's what I do. Yeah. So that's how I make my money, guys.
Great. Well, let's jump into it. Alexander, sure. Tom, the floor is yours. The title of this live is Biden and the EU dig a deeper hole. Is that accurate? How do you guys see things?
I think it's completely accurate. Once upon a time, the governments saw their job as making lives easier and better for their people. These governments, if you can call the EU a government, I mean, they're doing the opposite.
Putting it that way, Alex, is just hilarious, by the way.
I just found it astonishing that they should be doing this thing. And bear in mind, just 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was reading, briefings, White House briefings by senior anonymous officials talking about, how if the Russians started interrupting, oil and gas supplies, they would be weaponizing their energy flows. And we're doing it. We now have this situation where we're doing it to ourselves.
It's the exact opposite.
I mean, you cannot make this up. It is so weird, and it shows how completely disconnected from reality these people have become. Tom, you want to say something?
Well, what I would say, Alex, when you said that, you opened with that statement, supposedly governments are there for the benefit of their people, and with the implication being that they're now not doing that at all. They're actually out of their way, going out of their way to predate their own people, right? And that's the way the EU is acting. And I've been saying for a long time that the whole policy from Europe and Davos has been regarding European energy has been to create a monopsony scenario as opposed to a monopoly. And everybody knows what a monopoly is one single supplier. But a monopsony is the exact opposite of that, where there's one single buyer. And what the EU has tried to do is to try and force the Russians into this arrangement where they get to, as the buyer, they get to set the price. Now everybody knows that, yeah, that's true, that, you know, ultimately the consumer can withhold his support and say, no, you're charging too much, or I don't want to buy your goods or whatever. But at the same time, you absolutely don't have an option. You have to buy from them, and trying to force a price on the Russians that's below market value for the gas that they're supplying, or the energy they're supplying, or the commodities, or the fertilizer, or anything else, is just dumb. Because in no way, manner, shape, or form are the EU a monopsony on Russian energy. As the minute they tried this, when they canceled when Putin canceled South Stream, or forced him to cancel South Stream, what happened after that? He negotiated Power of Siberia with China, right, replacing the lost volumes with China, and now they've just signed Power of Siberia 2. Then he repurposed South Stream as Turk Stream, and you know, and we know the history from there. So it's what the EU is doing now is really their, and the US is doing the same thing. And I believe that this is fundamentally Davos driven, not not Wall Street driven, or not, you know, American patriotic interest driven. This is there is a functional split here. And I think Biden's executive order that we just got this morning about cryptocurrencies gives you a perfect example of what I'm talking about, right? Because it was a nothing burger. It was, we're gonna ban cryptos, and then it comes out and there's nothing. Why? Because Wall Street wants crypto, so Wall Street's going to get crypto. Wall Street's going to want to put money into the oil and gas sector. They're now lobbying heavily for this, and Biden's not going to be able to hold it back beyond his executive order. So this is clearly being driven by Klaus Schwab, the same way that the EU policy is being driven by Klaus Schwab, which is to make the United States less competitive, while they at the same time are now trying to make the European Union, after the COVID restrictions, more competitive. Has anybody noticed this? Right? So the Europeans are going to import Russian energy. The Americans are not. They've lifted all the COVID restrictions that had all these hundreds of thousands, millions of people in the streets all across Europe. Right, 2 weeks ago, they've lifted all those, and they're going to import energy. So now, hopefully, they're going to be able to get the prices down, and they're going to be able to save their political hides. While at the same time, Biden still keeps various aspects of the COVID regime in place, trying, you know, to cut off food and energy, so the imports into the U.S. in order to crash our economy. Why? Because they're desperately worried about capital flight, and which is what as you guys well know, that's what I watch all day long. I just look at the headlines and then watch the way the markets react to all this stuff, to see if I'm, if I'm right, to error check what I'm seeing. So I see all of that, and it's very clear that Davos is working for Davos, for Biden's working for Davos at this point. It's never been clearer to me. But he's lost the political battle in the U.S. because Wall Street's actually in charge.
Yeah. Can I just say, not getting too deep into the contagion, but I was reading, I wasn't reading, I was actually in contact with a friend of mine, a Hungarian friend of mine in Hungary. And there, of course, people are completely cynical and open-eyed about this thing. And there is a meme floating around because, of course, as you correctly say, all the restrictions have been lifted in Europe pretty much, and nobody's talking about this topic anymore in the way that they were just a few weeks ago. It was the dominant topic. It's no longer the topic. So apparently now the meme that's circulating around Hungary, and it's even you even see graffitos in the street. What was it? Putin killed the disease.
COVID.
I mean, he killed it because
it was even better. Like I cited
this story. Now it's the other one.
Either the Babylon Bee or the Onion ran a story. They we're going to nominate. We want to nominate Putin for the Nobel Prize for Medicine for curing COVID, and by invading Ukraine. It was hilarious. That meme ran around Twitter for days. It was hilarious. I didn't know. And everybody I told that one to, even the ones that seen it, they're like, every time you say it, they just you just laugh at the absurdity of it all, because it is truly patently absurd.
Yes. Anyway, the other thing I wanted to say is, of course, the EU is inevitably, and I'm talking about the bureaucracy in Brussels now, this is their great opportunity to set up a new slush fund. So we're having more bonds, apparently more Euro bonds. Remember, we were never going to have Euro bonds. Those apparently are on their way. So we're going to have more Euro bonds. We're going to have more QE in Europe. That seems now baked in the cake. There's going to be this giant program to convert us all to dispensing with Russian or energy. Some say it's going to reduce it by 60% in a year. Others say by 80%. All the
They'll be
technical
lucky
people,
they get 20.
Yeah, all the technical people say it can't be done. The Secretary General of NATO says it can't be done. Not NATO,
saying
sorry,
that.
of OPEC says it can't be done. So I mean,
Yeah.
you know, but the thing always to understand about these grand plans is that the part of it that is real, the part of it that is really going to happen, is not the great conversion of our energy mix in a year. It is the slush fund. It is the new the new bombs. And of course, that's what we will actually see. So we're going to have another big step towards the centralization of fiscal and monetary policy in Europe, in the Brussels bureaucracy. And of course, you have a situation where Germans are very agitated about the situation in Ukraine. Their media is all out on this. It's talking up all of this. So, of course, nobody in Germany is noticing that we're drifting ever more relentlessly towards Eurobonds. And of course, you have people within the government, Hahnbeck and Baerbock, the Green ministers, who, of course, wanted it to go in that direction.
Yep.
Anyway, so that obviously also fulfills the program. And I think that's the other thing that's going to come out of all of this. We're going to take another massive step towards further European economic integration, or at least attempted.
Absolutely. And the main thing you need to realize now on top of that is that the reason they're going to float this is because they need to continue re-liquefying the European banking system, which is now starting to seize up. So and it's very clear to me that, and you're absolutely right, Alex, that they're moving towards this, and there's going to be trillions of dollars in bonds. They're going to spend it on defense. So now Macron is going to get his, the EU army of his dreams, and French military contractors are going to, become the new European military industrial complex. I'm firmly convinced that the German auto industry is going to be repurposed. The parts of it that are not repurposed for electric vehicles are going to be repurposed for building tanks.
Yeah, exactly. I agree.
I completely. I mean, that's the German automotive industry is a juggernaut, and they're going to have plenty of production over capacity, and they're going to be able to build tanks there. So this is all coming. But my question to them is, how are they going to pay for it? Because, they can't keep the euro trading at $1.09 or $1.85 under this scenario when the Fed is absolutely going to tighten next week, and everybody else is tightening at the same time. The Fed's going to tighten into this thing. And I said last week in a big article that I wrote, and I firmly believe this, the European Union is, and I think you and I talked about it on Sunday when we were on with Crypto Rich, right? That the EU is caught between, the Wall Street on the one side and the Russian army on the other. But these are two facts on the ground that they don't have control over. And again, seeing the Bitcoin EO executive order come out of Biden this morning, which has no teeth to it whatsoever, tells me that was written by Wall Street. It was not written by Gary Gensler. It was not written by Janet Yellen. Janet Yellen was actually crying in her beer over this. And it was not written by Davos. So, and Lagarde is getting no help. As the more she screams for, we need global crypto regulation, or the Russians will be able to evade sanctions, and even that fell on deaf ears. Did anybody notice that? The Biden administration can't get the Saudis on the phone. They can't get the UAE on the phone, right? So, the monetary system is changing. Davos is in serious trouble in trying to hold this together, and the European capital markets are absolutely being held together by Lagarde with spit and baling wire. The Eurostoxx 50 is down something like 35%. The DAX is off 30%. The European banks are off 40%. And what a shock that once we finally get to that moment, now they start floating the idea, we need to go to Eurobonds in order to recapitalize the banks, basically. So that slush fund you're talking about is a liquidity fund in order to keep the banking system from collapsing, but you're not going to be able to keep people from trying to get out of the euro.
Yes.
Okay. That's the big one. And then, of course, European sovereign debt, which they're already planning on canceling anyway. So this is part of their plan. They're going full scorched earth on Europe. And
I entirely agree. Can I just say, we've now got into a situation with the administration where the President of the United States is trying to telephone the leaders of the Persian Gulf oil monarchies, and they don't answer his calls. Now, that is astonishing. That is something I would never once have believed possible.
And who did they talk to afterwards, Alexander?
They talked to Vladimir Putin. In fact, can I just say something? Can I just say something on this? Because there's been a very interesting development, which is that a deal of some kind has been done, because over the last week or so, 2 weeks, it's been impossible to access the Kremlin's website and the Russian Foreign Ministry's website. Now, last night, they suddenly became accessible again, fully accessible, and were until, certainly until the moment when we started this program. And I noticed that the BBC has been allowed to continue doing English language broadcasts from Russia. So clearly some kind of deal, at least that's how it looks to me. Clearly some kind of deal has been done on that front, that these DOS attacks on these sites have been stopped in return for allowing certain parts of the Western media to continue to function on a much more limited scale in Russia itself. But the result is that you can read on the Kremlin website readouts of all of Putin's conversations with such worthies as the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Mohammed bin Salman. They're all there. They're all talking with Putin. I gather I think he's a prime minister rather than the head of government of Indonesia is also about to call Putin soon, and he's now speaking. He's not obviously a Gulf monarchy, but he's again apparently saying, sanctions. We are not going to support sanctions, and there should be a negotiated solution. All those kind of things. So it's very interesting to see all these various states now following. Whom they're talking to. They're not talking to the President of the United States. And I never expected ever to see that in my lifetime. If, let's say, at the time of the Arab oil embargo in 1973, which I remember, by the way, I mean, I lived through it. If anybody had told me then that the King of Saudi Arabia would talk to Leonid Brezhnev, but would not talk to Richard Nixon, I would have said that's ludicrous. I mean, that's not happening. Well, it's happening now.
And so what does that mean, guys? I mean, how do you see this playing out? Did Biden fall into some sort of trap laid out by the Russians and the Chinese and the EU? I mean, is this what's the end game to this?
I think if there was a trap, it was laid by the Europeans. I don't think it was laid by the Russians. I think the Russians are just looking at all of this and they're just saying to themselves, these people have taken leave of their senses. I think that's what they think. And by the way, I was reading in the Financial Times, I think this is inevitably going to happen, by the way, that the Chinese demand for oil is so enormous that they can absorb all of Russia's oil production. I mean, remember, this is a country with a population bigger than that of the US, Europe, and Japan combined. And, it's a growing economy and all that. So they can do it. And, of course, the other Asian producers, the ASEAN states, with which Russia, by the way, has very good relations. Yep. They're not following the sanctions line. So it will take some time for all of this to be recalibrated, and there will be a lot of turbulence in the meantime, but they can do it. But I don't think the Russians planned this. I'm sure they didn't actually. I mean, that wasn't I mean, they wouldn't. I can't see what interest they would have had in doing it. But it's entirely possible that the administration was led up the garden path by some people in Europe. I mean, there are some pretty, shall we say, intricate people in Europe.
You're talking
perfectly
Davos.
capable of
absolutely.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So
to put a little bit more color on that, Alex. What trades on its own Shanghai exchange over in what trades on its own futures exchange over in Shanghai? Medium sour crude, right? Yeah. The Shanghai the Shanghai futures contract is a medium sour grade. It's the only medium sour futures contract in the world. The Brent and WTI are both light sweet. And because of that, I've been saying this for years. And because of that, all we're doing now is pushing all of that demand and all of that. So we're pushing these people off of ICE and the COMEX and the London markets, the oil traders. We're pushing them off of those markets. We're going to push them onto Shanghai, and Russian oil is finally going to get priced not as at a discount to Brent like it always is, but at its own honest clearing price, because the Shanghai medium sour contract is closer in specification to what the Russians actually produce, to Russian zero grade. And so this is a very, very important key point to understand, that we're seeing the financial architecture of the world shift east. Last night on my live stream, I went over the list of countries that the Russians now consider unfriendly actors. Did you notice the people who were on that list that were not on that list? The people that were not on that list, all of ASEAN, right? All the ASEAN countries. But the big one is Turkey. Turkey. Did anybody notice that Turkey wasn't on the list? Of course. And why wasn't Turkey on the list? Because Erdogan came out yesterday and said, hey, we can do trade with the Russians in whatever currency they want, including gold. Okay. So obviously he's positioning the Turkish banks, which have been under tremendous stress by external foreign actors for a long time now. And I've written extensively about what I think Erdogan is doing in Turkey. He's not making all the right decisions, but he's in a very weak position. So he's playing a very bad hand that he himself helped deal. I'm not absolving him of his mistakes here, but you have an opportunity now to pledge the Turkish banks to be conduits for global trade into and out of Russia. And it's not going to be very particularly easy for the U.S. or anybody else to sanction them. And at this point, I don't even think Erdogan cares, because he's the one who helped Iran evade the sanctions from 2012 to 2015 until the JCPOA was signed, by selling, by effectively laundering oil sales in gold through Turkish banks. So it's going to happen again.
Yes. Can I just add something else, which people I don't think noticed, which is that he's distanced himself from the decision to sell those Bayraktar drones to Ukraine and to build that factory there. He's now said that it was a private initiative, not a governmental one. Now, if you believe that, I have a bridge to sell you. Of course, it was a governmental initiative. I mean, it's inconceivable that Erdogan didn't give the green light to it. And in fact, if you just dial back a couple of weeks, you'll find that he was fulsome in talking about military cooperation with Ukraine. But I mean, he's now had to make a decision as to which side of the fence he's going to come down. And he's not really had any choice. So he's come down on the side of working with the Russians and distancing himself from the Ukrainians, even as he sets up this meeting between Lavrov and the Ukrainian foreign minister Kuleba, which is happening in Turkey. Kuleba, by the way, is totally incompetent and very, very hard line. So it's not going to be an easy meeting, to put it mildly. And Kuleba has missed opportunities to meet with Lavrov on many occasions. So it's going to be a difficult meeting, but it is happening now. And it's Erdogan who's arranged it. And it's definitely a step, going back to the points we made at the start of the program, towards a proper, a further step in the negotiation process, which will lead eventually to the conclusion of this war.
Right. Alexander, Tom, can you guys address Biden's speech that he gave in the banning of Russian energy, what that means for Americans, their daily life, what it means for Americans 6 months, a year, 2 years down the line. And then can you address Franz Timmermans' statement yesterday, where he said that the EU will be energy independent in a year, and what that means for European citizens? Is it possible? Can it be done? How are Europeans going to get by? And what if Russia does decide to shut everything down to Europe?
Well, I'll leave Biden to Tom. I'll just talk about Timmermans. It's ludicrous. It's fantastic. It has no basis in reality, and it's already been torpedoed by the Germans this morning with Habeck and the environment minister. I can't remember. I think they're all Greens, coming out and saying that no, Germany will not reopen its nuclear power stations. So I mean, the whole idea is ludicrous. It's a fantasy. The only big question for me about it is, does Tindemans believe it? And perhaps he's deluded enough to do so. But the idea that you can change the entire direction of energy policy, the entire structure of energy in a continent as complex and as big as Europe in a year, it can't be done. I mean, it begs the question about what these people are smoking. That's all I can say about that.
Yeah, because
And
whatever they're
what it will
smoking,
do,
Alex, I want some.
yeah, what it will do, as I've already said, in Britain today, and it's not just me. I mean, it's all over the media. As on the 1st of April, household energy bills in Britain are rising by 54%. Now, this is before the crisis that was triggered by this war. Now, bear in mind, the businesses in Britain, including industrial businesses, have already been paying these higher energy prices. Those energy prices are going to grow even further. Industrial companies, which are heavy industry users, are going to be extremely badly affected. We're going to see a collapse. We're going to see inflation, and at the same time, which will lead to a collapse in demand. But that's going to happen simultaneously with energy prices that are still going to grow. I've never known a situation like this before. People are talking about stagflation. I think, take away the stag. I think somebody said, it was Gonzalo who said yesterday or the other day in one of our live streams, that we're looking at an inflationary recession. And it seems to me that's much more likely. That's a far more plausible scenario out of all of this. That's my take on Europe. I mean, I don't know whether Tom has anything to add. Biden, Tom, I leave it to you.
So let's start with the basics. By the way, stagflation is an inflationary depression.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. That's what stagflation is.
You're right.
Keynesians don't like to use don't like to admit terms because they're fundamentally Marxist, and they like to change the definitions of words because that's what Marxists are really good at. That's but the only thing Marxists are good at other than killing people. So editorial comments off. Now let's move to our to the resident Marxists here in the United States. I can already tell you what's happened. The last time I left my house, or the last time I went out into the world, gas was $3.65 a gallon. Last night, on my way home from taking my wife into town, gas was $4.19 a gallon. Yeah, that was 4 days. That was 4 days ago. Yeah. Cutting off the Russian, as I mentioned it on my live stream last night. Zero Hedge has showed us multiple times the import numbers of Russian oil into the United States, and everybody talks about the 600,000 barrels a day we were importing. We were importing. That was back in early February. Once things got to a point where everybody knew that there was going to be hostilities, the United States started cutting off and started stop buying Russian oil. Now, at the same time, gas in the United States has gone from $2.89 a gallon or $2.75 a gallon to $4.19 a gallon here locally in North Florida. So we've seen a 40% increase in the price of gasoline when you take 600,000 barrels worth of Russian oil off the market. Okay. Why? Because those refiners down south don't have any feedstock. Why? Because those refiners on the Gulf were built by Citgo, which is a subsidiary of PBDSA, or at least used to be, and were designed to crack heavy sour crude coming out of Venezuela, which is also off the market. Okay? People don't understand this. Like, well, can't we just bring it in from the Permian? Well, the Permian doesn't produce the oil that these refineries are tuned for. Fracking produces ultralight sweet crude, which is great for gasoline and jet fuel, and for short alkane precursors like ethylene diamine and the short straight chain hydrocarbon stuff. But it's not good for producing diesel fuel and even really gasoline, to be honest with you, because even gasoline is too, it's not an efficient use of the oil to, refine that into gasoline. Okay. Because it's not, this is the way the oil industry works. So oil is not just oil. Like, it's very important to understand that. So the Russians were substituting out for the sanctions on Venezuela. So that is also not something that can change overnight unless Maduro is willing to now, deal with the Americans again and sell us oil, and we lift all the sanctions on him and PPPSA and everybody else involved in the process, right?
Did you say Maduro or Guaido?
Maduro, not the Venezuelan Obama. That's
Right.
let's look at that guy and tell me that he's not the Venezuelan version of Barack Obama. So yeah, no, absolutely. There and it looks like early, at least from what the American side of things, Maduro's willing to talk to us. Now, what price is he going to extract from us to bring that oil back onto the market? Okay, come on, like it's going to be crazy, and how much egg and how much egg are we going to have on our face and everything else? And at the same time, we've got Pete Buttigieg out there saying if you don't like the prices of gas, or you can buy an electric car, like it doesn't matter. We're not tuned. Energy is energy. Like these people don't understand. Energy is energy. So for the rest of the year, we're going to have an inflationary depression, otherwise known as stagflation, here in the United States as well. The question is it going to be better or worse here in the US versus Europe versus all these other places? That's the big question. Who's more vulnerable to this? And then who's more vulnerable to the capital flight? Because, and that gets back into the political situation. The United States right now, with Biden in charge, as you and I talked about on Sunday, Alex, does not have the ability to get rid of the Biden administration. We don't have a mechanism really to get rid of the Biden administration until the midterms come in the fall, right? Because at that point, a different party can take over Congress. We can get rid of the president, vice president, and the new Speaker of the House can ascend to the presidency. It's our only mechanism, other than rational Democrats taking control of the administration, and they're in short supply because who are the two dominant wings in the Democratic Party? Obama, who works for Davos, and Hillary Clinton, who works for Davos. They're just two sides of the same coin, and there is nobody within the Democratic Party leadership to step into the political vacuum and say, okay, let's get rid of Biden, let's get rid of Harris, and put somebody rational in who will start, changing policy now. So this is why the fight really isn't in the U.S. The fight is between the administration, which is clearly working for other foreign factors, and Wall Street, who is sitting on their puppets within Congress to stop any more terrible legislation from getting through. And this is why I've been focused on the domestic situation on Capitol Hill, what can get through and what can't get through. And that's why it's so very important to be watching that for the last 9 months, because if without that, the situation in the United States would be dire, and we would be headed towards civil war within 2 years. The fact that we're not likely to hit that now because Wall Street has told Klaus Schwab to go stop it. And I'm dead serious. It's very clear. That's what I say.
Can I just add one very quick little point, which is, of course, that I understand that, I'm not an oil specialist, but I understand that heavier oils are the oils that are used principally in making diesel fuel. I believe that is correct. Now,
yes,
far more household cars in Europe, especially in Germany, drive on diesel than in the United States. Obviously, if you're talking about trucks and lorries, they all use diesel. But in Europe, it's much more common to have a diesel-powered car. So if you're going to start having problems getting heavy oils, those cars, of course, are not going to be easy to continue operating. Now, of course, going back to a point that Tom was making, what does use diesel engines? It's also used tanks. They're also used by tanks. Just saying.
Yeah, they're used by tanks. Well, here's something else to put into your calculus, and something that my partner Dexter White and I did a podcast on a couple of months ago, back in November or December, which is the global urea market is a mess, and all modern diesels today, for emissions purposes, use urea to clean the exhaust, and they use it by the gallon. And if you can't get, and that's including now for even farm equipment, okay, and whatnot. So you have, and then there's different degrees of diesel fuel as well. There's heavy number 2. There's I used to work in the oil industry, at least, so I know what I'm, so number one fuel is gasoline. Number two fuel is diesel fuel. There's 2A and 2B. Heavy slash, like kerosene is 2A. Diesel fuel is 2B. And then there's 3, 4, and 5. And then 6 is basically crude oil. Number 5 fuel is, home heating oil is like number 4 fuel. And then number 5 fuel is generally used by like the small ships and whatnot. But I mean, honestly, like, crude oil tankers, they just burn freaking crude oil because that's the most energy dense of all. Because the lower the number, the lower the BTUs per gallon, right? Because you're going to lighter and lighter grades you're going to the lighter hydrocarbons, right? Ethane doesn't have nearly the amount of energy per mole. Being a chemist, I get to pull this out now. Doesn't have nearly the energy per mole that dodecane has, or C20 has. It's a carbon 20 chain. Much more energy stored in a C20 wax than there is in ethane or methane, right? Or propane. So propane has more than methane. Again, the higher the longer the C chain, the more energy there is, right? So, the important. I know a little bit in the weeds, but I love to remind people of how that oil is just not oil, right? It's very important to understand this because most people in Congress don't understand this. So the diesel fuel market is a mess all around the world now because urea exports are shutting down all around the world. And urea is also an important component for nitrogen fertilizer. So now we have a double stress on the urea system, just the same way that we have a double stress on the corn industry because we blend 10% of our on-road gasoline with corn-based ethanol, which is also just dumb. So I'm expecting to see that reverse as well after the midterms in the fall in the United States. Now that I just think about it, just popped into my head. You're going to start to see gasoline. The corn's going to be too expensive to blend into gasoline. And the whole RINs system for buying credits, basically they're basically corn ethanol carbon credits, blending credits that we have. We have a system here in the U.S. I don't know if you guys know about this. It's called RINs. You can look this up. And they have and refiners have to buy these they're no different than carbon credits. Buy them in order to either offset or pay a fine if they can't blend in 10%. Ethanol or not. And that also creates a system. That market will create tremendous whipsaws in the chain in the price of gasoline at the pump because of what the refiners how the refiners have to deal with buying those credits on the open market. So you can watch the RINs market to see if there's any stress as well. But I fully expect with corn at $7 a bushel and likely going to 10 or 12, there ain't no freaking way that we're going to see 10% blended ethanol into the gasoline, not when we're producing so much coming out of the Permian. So so it's going to be a very interesting, moment in time. There, for the most part, I think the Biden administration is playing games here with the Russian oil ban, right? Because look, the East Coast refineries get most of their oil from the North Sea. It's cheaper to buy it from buy Brent crude from the North Sea and ship it across the Atlantic Ocean to New Jersey than it is to put it on a pipeline from Texas and ship it across the country. Like it doesn't. The oil markets in the United States are very regional. Okay, so this is very important. So like Texas, all that stuff in the Permian and even the back end goes to the Midwest refiners and into Oklahoma and the stuff out of the Permian and the one in Colorado that's slipping my mind now. That all goes down south to Texas and the Mexican refineries on the other side of the border and like it's all this stuff. So and then you have the Gulf Coast refineries that mostly get their stuff from overseas, and then you've got the East Coast refineries that mostly get their feedstock from Brent. So that's not going to change anytime soon. You can't change that in a year. You can't change that in 10 years. And and the only way to change that dynamic at this point from what's been built is to open up the Keystone XL pipeline and bring Canadian tar sands, which are a perfect analog to Venezuelan heavy sour, and bring that down south to the Gulf Coast refineries, and therefore change the game that way. And of course, obviously Davos doesn't want that to happen. So that's never That's not going to happen until there's a change in the administration.
Yeah.
Right.
Can we talk a bit about food, because this is the other thing? Sorry, Alex, I cut you.
No. I just I was going to ask about food.
Okay.
I was going to actually ask about. Tom mentioned the fact that the elections and the midterms, but I would like to ask. The Republicans seem to be fully on board with the Democrats on this as well. So I'm trying to figure out how does anything change with the midterms, and you have the rhinos and all of that stuff. And then I would like both of you guys to talk about Russia's retaliation, how Russia is faring with this shock and awe economic bomb that was dropped on them, how they're faring, how they're going to handle this. We've got a lot of reports as to some of the measures that Russia's going to take, but we don't really have many concrete things to go on. We just have a lot of I don't want to say rumors, but different statements coming out of the Russian power hierarchy. So three things: the Republicans, food, and Russia.
Go ahead, Alex.
Republicans, Tom. This is
your, okay. The Republicans. Okay. So remember the one thing that the dominant foreign policy arrangement, our orthodoxy in the Democratic Party is neoliberal. The dominant political or foreign policy orthodoxy in the Republican Party is neoconservative. From everybody else's, from the external perspective, they're exactly the same, but on domestic policy, they are different. Okay. And the Republican Party is far more susceptible to an incursion or an insurgency of populism, which I think is coming this fall. You've got 31 members of the House current members of the House are not standing for re-election. This has never happened before. They're all retiring. Okay. So this is 8% of the House is going to be someone new by definition. A lot of those seats are now going to be in play that would never have been in play before. Every political calculus you've ever had about the United States changes at $8 a gallon gasoline. So if Donald Trump is actually doing what I hope he's doing, and I don't know because I don't have any idea what that crazy man is doing, but if he is putting in place around the country and vetting House candidates who are, MAGA types or Tea Party types, there is an honest opportunity here for a massive version of 2010. Post Ron Paul, we had the Tea Party moved in 2008, 2010, right? Well, we have that same opportunity here. We have a Federal Reserve who is absolutely ready to tighten and is signaling that Congress is at fault as much as the Fed is for inflation. The Fed has never said this before. They openly blamed Congress. This is another thing telling you that Wall Street's going to back candidates like this who are now going to start pushing for fiscal conservatism. Okay. Which means now we're starting to get, everybody is starting to come around to my mode of thinking, which is that there's an opportunity between here and 2024 for a new Reagan-Volcker pair to show up and try and, stabilize the situation here in the U.S. In order to do that, in order to allow the Fed to raise rates, they have to, without a doubt, cut spending by $300 billion per point of interest that they want to raise. We will have negative real rates in the United States for a long time coming. Davos has done a wonderful job of putting us behind that 8 ball, and I don't think there's any way of us getting around it. So the Republicans have the opportunity here if they see it, and if there is a groundswell within the party that the party establishment can't stop. I'm not saying it's likely, but there's a greater probability of this happening in the fall than people give credit for. Okay. And I'm up to about 30% of this happening, as opposed to, because it depends on how big their win is. If they come in with a 70, 80, 90 seat majority, forget it. Everything's on the table. Impeaching Joe Biden, putting Kamala Harris in jail for treason, like all of it's on the table. Pelosi, all of them going to jail, all of the stuff coming out, because if the political wins, even the Democrat opposition to this in the Senate will collapse because the political winds will have shifted so hard that they won't be able to stop it. And so there won't be votes along party lines on this stuff. Forget all that. So that all goes out the window again at $8 a gallon gasoline and a 90 seat win by the Republicans. Now, if they only win 40 seats, it's status quo. Okay. So that's the Republican situation. So
with food, the food situation in Europe, people are now starting to talk about. It's even starting to percolate through into the mainstream media. So I've been reading about the spikes in food prices right across places like, even the Financial Times, which is not actually the place any longer where you would expect to find, the worms of doubt starting to appear. But they are now really, really concerned about the food situation. And I think this is, again, a major difference, because the United States, I think, produces most of its own food. In a country like Britain, we don't. It's an important thing to say that, nor can we, realistically. So if we have worldwide shortages in food, and I'm to be very clear, I mean, we're not going to get starvation, mass famine in Europe, but we're going to get a lot of hardship outside Europe, outside the West, in Africa, in Middle East, in all sorts of places. It will be much harder. But in Europe, even in Britain, if we start to see food prices spike over the next few weeks, which we will, then I think that is inevitably going to have major political effects. So you're going to have rising energy costs, and that's now already happening. As I said, I'm already looking at a 54% increase in my energy bills on the 1st of April. And it hasn't even factored in, as I said, the events of the last few weeks. We're going to have surging energy costs combined with surging food costs. This is going to cause a demand collapse like we have never seen. I mean, I cannot see how it can do otherwise. People have to have energy. They have to have food. They're going to have to cut back on everything else. So, we're going to see, consumer goods sale purchases, appliances, cars. I mean, it's going to fall off the cliff. I can't see what other possibility there is, with mortgage prices likely to start rising also.
Yeah, no, I agreed. Like, people have been asking me what to do, and because that's part of what I provide for people as a service is, well, in general, what would you do in this? And I'm like, well, if you have to take on debt, do it quickly and do it at a fixed rate.
Yeah.
While we're still at historic lows, but mortgage rates are rising here in the United States, even if nominal interest rates haven't risen, right? Just because the U.S. 10-year is still trading below 2%, that's mostly because that's a capital flight effect, right? We've seen a move down. The U.S. 10-year has been vacillating between 1.75 and like 2.05% for the last couple of weeks, and it's going to continue that way because the people are selling the rallies, and they're buying the dip and selling the rallies. Like, and the U.S. yield curve is flattening, right? Because of this, and the Fed's going to raise into a flattening yield curve, which is saying we're going to have a recession, right? So, but they have to do so because they have to maintain the credibility. Food prices here in the United States are going to go through the same thing. Yes, we are much more food self-sufficient, but again, we're already hearing stories of farmers not being able to afford to plant seeds. No less to sow the crops. There is not going to be a Ukrainian wheat harvest this year because there's no diesel fuel in Ukraine, because the Russians just blew it all up to stop the Ukrainian army from being able to resupply itself.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's put away childish things. It's going to be really, really bad. The thing that I'm more worried about than anything else is not just all of that, the rising grain prices, which are the end state of supply chain breakdowns, because industrial metals have exploded. Now the market for industrial metals no longer exists. The LME is just not trading nickel futures right now. Yeah. So that's no stainless steel. Then there's iron ore futures are crazy. Coal prices like Peabody. So the other day, Peabody was like underwater on a bunch of its hedges, and may have to declare force majeure and go ask for a freaking bailout because they're so underwater on their hedged future production that relative to current prices in coal, that it's off the charts. And this, again, start thinking this through. That means steel production's under stress. That means that when a flange breaks on an oil distillation tower, a fractional distillation tower at an oil refinery, and it's backlogged 6 weeks because they just put the backup on there 6 months ago. Okay. The rubber gaskets, the O-rings, all the basic maintenance, all these things that we've always, aside from the fact that we outsourced it all to China and had no domestic production of it here in the United States in the first place, then there's the rest of it of just the whole system just not working. I mean, this is a very complex global economy, and now we're watching the globalization of it. Not to say that this is not that globalization is good. This is not a globalization is good rant. Okay, that's a different. There's globalization, there's mercantilism, and then there's different types of globalization. We've pursued the bad one, right? We now have a globalization process that is reversing. We have now the possibility of the Russians and the Chinese also forcing a collapse of the financial markets and asset prices and forcing a deflationary spiral on the gold and energy markets, which I've written about. Now, think about that in the context of just trying to get goods and services to flow to be able to replace parts and be able to get brake pads for your car or for, fuel filters or just basic stuff. Like, replacement batteries for your contractors' drills to build your to hang drywall with. I mean, this is the kind of thing that people haven't fully grasped yet. That civilization, the civilization is a reflection of the sophistication of the division of labor. The division of labor is contracting. Civilization, therefore, has to contract along with it, and that means everything involved in the production of food is going to contract as well. So even if everybody wants to plant seeds and weather conditions are correct, and there may not be the combines and the seed and the machinery just may not be working. Because we're living through Act 3 of Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. They broke the world.
They broke the world.
Let's talk about Russia.
Let's talk about Russia. And before you get to that, Alexander, I just want to let everybody know that we'll go on for like another 15, 20 minutes.
Sure.
If we get to questions, super chats, we'll see. But if we don't, to get to all the questions,
I may have to bow out. If you guys want to keep going, then I have to bow out.
No, because we also have to do a hard stop as well, Tom. So we will do a dedicated video and we'll get to everybody's questions. So don't worry, we're going to make sure we answer everybody's question in a dedicated video that will be up tomorrow. I also want to let everybody know that we're going to have a video up hopefully tonight with Dr. Peter McCullough, and that will be on Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute, Super U, and of course Locals. Obviously we can't put it on YouTube for obvious reasons, but we have a really, really good video where we are with Dr. Peter McCullough, and I'm sure everybody knows who Dr. Peter McCullough is. All right, let's wrap it up with Russia. We've already talked about the US, we've talked about the EU, we've covered all this stuff. Let's talk about what is Russia up to? What's going on?
I mean, it's not entirely easy to get a complete picture of what they're doing. First of all, I would say this: there wasn't a bank run, and I think there was an attempt to try and trigger one. But as far as I can tell, there wasn't a bank run. The financial system is still functioning. The economy is still functioning. I think they're going to go full mobilization for about a year, which will cover them to reorient their trade with China, whatever. And I think that will be a disruptive and difficult process, but it's something that they have been preparing for a very, very long time. I think that they can do it. They have the resources to do it, and they will do it. And I think that's, in a summary, where I think we are. I don't know what you'd want to add about this, Tom.
I see that. I think. Let's start from the beginning. The big thing. I think we're nearly at the end of Act 1 of this little drama, which is Ukraine, which is military facts on the ground in Ukraine. Once that has been established, it is now okay. Well, we've brought out our knights. Okay, so what are you doing? You're going to bring out your bishop. Okay, so what are you doing? And Victoria Nuland yesterday came out and started talking about what she wants to do, and I think she's desperately trying to get ahead of this the bioweapons lab stuff narrative. I don't even want. I mean, obviously, so there's so much to think about there.
Big story.
From the Russians' perspective, they have a number of potential tripwires here, but it's obvious what you said is correct. There's going to be a reorientation of their financial system. I believe at some point in the near future, we're going to see them announce a closing of the capital account. And potentially, shifting to a gold-backed domestic version of the ruble would be the smartest thing they could do. It would also be inflammatory, but there's not a lot the world can do about it. Whereas, so that you understand that what that means is that the international exchange rate between the dollar and the ruble will become literally meaningless. because there's going to be no meaningful trade between the dollar
Yeah.
and the ruble, and you're going to be
Exactly.
much more interested in the ruble yuan cross and the
Yeah.
ruble,
Yeah.
you know, Turkish lira cross, and the same thing is going and even the ruble euro cross is going to fall, and the Russians already understand all this. So,
Absolutely. I completely agree with that, by the way. That's already happening at a tremendous pace. Carry on.
Yes, absolutely it is. And so what I think the Russians, what I'm focused on now is what happens in Act 2.
Yeah.
It's very clear that the Russians believe they have a tremendous amount of evidence of US, NATO, and EU malfeasance, to put it mildly, in Ukraine on multiple vectors, be it slaughter of ethnic Russians, bioweapons research, smuggling in of nuclear weapons, arming, blah, 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 all of these things, right? Now the question is, if they can actually force Ukraine to surrender, which Davos will not let them do, which under any circumstances, but at some point they may actually have to, right?
Yeah.
We'll see. Because once there's a surrender, then we can then do the post-war discussion about who was in the right, who was in the wrong, what are the negotiations, where are we? And the Russians are going to want to present all of their evidence.
Yes.
And if they can get to the stage where, and of course, what do we know about American oligarchs? They never want to get to discovery. Legal lawsuit, right? They never want to go to discovery. They always want to settle out of court before we get to discovery, right? So, right. So, this is the roadblock that we're at now. But in the great general sense, that's obviously what the Russians are doing. I'm much more worried about the next couple of months of how the legal situation is manipulated on the ground in order to try and frame this as Russian aggression and to destroy evidence of the malfeasance and to keep the narrative where it is negative Russia, Putin bad, we good, and then just put up an iron curtain so that nobody looks behind it.
Yes.
Right. That's where I think the Russians are maneuvering on that front as assiduously or as aggressively as they are on the ground in Ukraine.
Absolutely. Can I just say, in terms of getting information and putting all that together, I mean, it's important always to remember that the Russians have an extremely sophisticated intelligence gathering operation in Ukraine and always have. So I'm pretty sure, for example, that there are all kinds of documents and records and things they will already have had in their possession before this even began. By the way, there's been just on a minor point. I mean, now we've had the admission that there was some kind of biolab experiments going on in Ukraine, which is interesting and that's come from the US. I mean, that's interesting.
They finally had to admit that there's one in Odessa named after Richard Lugar, for Christ's sake. I mean,
I know. I mean,
can't argue with it.
Can I just say, I mean, I'm not a person who likes to jump to conclusions, but
right,
if this was all entirely, above board and perfectly normal activity, why was it not made? Why was it not published? Why was it kept secret? Why was it not admitted to for so long?
And then once people figured out what was going on, they scrubbed it from all the websites.
Well, exactly. And of course, the other thing that's now happened is within a short time ago, I mean, the Ukrainians today have admitted that they had highly enriched uranium.
Oh, I didn't see that yet.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just
coming from the Ukrainians.
It's coming out from the Ukrainians, apparently. Yeah. I mean,
wow.
So, things like this. Head of Ukraine's Energoatom admits that there was highly enriched uranium in Ukraine. Oh, I should say until 2012. But I'm sure that we will be getting more revelations coming out. So, all kinds of things like this are going to start dribbling out over the next few weeks, months, years.
Well, what I'm hoping for, I'll be honest with you guys, is at some point the narrative is going to shift so hard, and it's going to be the political wins. Again, go back to the situation in the U.S. domestic situation, political situation could shift radically within a year.
Yeah.
to allow all of this stuff to come to light, because
Yes.
it will be in someone's best interest
Yes.
to allow it to come to light,
Yes.
because the power structure that's protecting it right now collapses. So why it's so very important that the Wall Street versus the Fed, Wall Street and the Fed versus Davos fight is so important, because if Wall Street can break the ECB and break Davos in Europe, then Davos's hold on everybody else within the Biden junta starts to collapse. And then we have a complete, we have rats leaving the sinking ship, and they all start, knifing each other in the back. And it's the night of the long knives here in the United States. And all of the stuff starts coming to light. And it's very possible that this could happen, but you're going to have to read those tea leaves very carefully. And you're going to have to watch what people are saying in publications like the Washington Post, the Hill, the New York Times, and others, and really say, okay, who's saying what in what format and in what publication when. All of those things are going to be very important. And to be honest with you, my partner Dexter White is a master at this. I'm not very good at it. He's the master at this. He gets it. And so I'm the public conduit of a lot of those ideas. So so we're watching this stuff carefully on that front, because that's what we're looking for, because we can see it happening in real time. Okay.
Yes. Passing, whoever expected to have to do passing of the American media? Once upon a time, when I was a student, I was doing part of my degree at the School of Slavonic and East European Studies, and you had to learn how to read Soviet newspapers, and it was very much like you say, Izvestia would take one line, Pravda slightly different, Sovietskaya Industria would be saying something else. You'd have to work out, pass them, and on the surface they'd all be saying the same thing, but when you drilled in, you'd find the sort of code words which told you that there was some kind of a debate and discussion going on. Well, I never ever expected that one day we would get to the point of having to do the same thing in the United States. I mean,
It's funny, Alex, because I've always felt that way. We've always known, like the Washington Post works for the CIA, the Washington Times works for the RNC. This one works for the Times works for the DNC. Blah blah. So but again, we're Americans. Like that's we understand that. But the American media now has become so concentrated in 2 or 3 companies. Between Thomson Reuters, and they pretty much own everything. And then and I remember listening to conversations back when we were in college or just out of college, a few years out of college, and talking about the UPI being bought by Reuters or whatever, when UPI was bought the first time it was bought, and our AP bought UPI, so now we only had one news feed as opposed to 2 different news feeds. We had the AP feed, we had the UPI, and they were never quite the same. At least they were in competition with one another. When that got bought, like everything changed. Now, I didn't really care back then. This is hard one for me. I've had to come into it in my middle age. When I was younger, I didn't care about any of this stuff at all. So, but I remember people saying to me, "Hey, this is a big deal," and me going, "Yeah, all right, whatever." And then 20 years later, it's even worse. And the concentration of media into the hands of very few group of people is very dangerous. And we're reaping the whirlwind of that today, because they're all controlled by the same people now. So.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Let's see. Alexander, how much time do you have?
I could do another 5 minutes, probably not more.
Great. Yeah. Great. Okay. So this is what we'll do. One more question to you guys. And like I said, we're going to answer all the super chats in another video, and we'll get that video up. So everyone, thank you once again for those super chats and those questions. We will answer every single one of them. We'll get them up. Alexander's going to be doing a live stream in a few hours from now on Locals, where he's going to answer more questions. And the final question to both of you, Tom and Alexander, what is your advice for everybody that's watching this, given this big, massive change that we're seeing take place? What are your thoughts?
I am not going to give advice, because I think
your thoughts. What should people be on the lookout?
I'm going to tell. All I'm going to say is I'm going to say what I'm going to do, which is to be straightforward about this. I'm going to pay as much as I can early. So, I get to pay as much of my energy bills, my water bills, all of those sort of bills as soon as I can, because I fully expect that by the end of this year, they're going to be a lot higher. So I'm going to try and cover myself to the best extent that I can for the year ahead, because I'm looking at a high inflation situation. The other thing, and I'm not an investment person, but I think that in inflation situation, you have to try and find ways of putting your money where it will retain value, and that's something which I need to get advice about. But I wouldn't leave it in the bank. That's my personal view.
No, you're correct about that, because especially in Europe, and same here in the United States, as a depositor, you are an unsecured creditor of the bank. You can be bailed in to pay the bank's debts. So just always remember that. In 2008, during Lehman, I pulled every dollar I had out of the financial system. It all went into gold and cash. I liquidated IRAs. I liquidated state pension fund money that I had, all of it. I paid the 20% penalty or 10% penalty. I paid it all. I don't care. And since then, I'll be honest with you, I really don't have very much money invested either, because part of what I do is to stay objective, is to not really, have a horse in a particular race. Okay? I mean, I own cryptos, I own gold and whatnot, obviously. I've admitted to those things, but as far as stocks are concerned, no, my stock accounts, I have almost nothing in them. And in this environment, it's going to be tangible assets over intangible assets. Intangible assets. Assets are going to deflate. Commodities are inflating. This is the classic Austrian business cycle collapse style. So in broadest strokes, get yourself into tangible assets. And if you have significant amount of debt, try and pay it down as quickly as possible. You should have been doing this over the last 4 years, seeing this coming. But if you're not going to outrun inflation, okay, in the equity markets. I may be an equity market bull, for example, in the United States, but only on capital flight, pushing and pulling. You may be able to outperform inflation in certain sectors. Obviously, energy, obviously, industrial metals, obviously, gold, silver. But whatnot. But truth be told, at this point in time, do what everybody else is doing. Cash is king, and cash gives you optionality. Okay, and and have ways of preserving your positive cash flow, because positive cash flow is how you get through this. Okay, it's not as about how much cash you have in the bank; it's how much it's costing you to live, and whether you can live, within. You can stay positive, because once you get into a negative cash flow situation, it spirals on you very, very quickly. And if you have any debt at all, it just collapses you. And so that would be that's my general advice to everybody. I've been saying this. This is what Gold Goats are built on. It's that basic ethos. So,
right. Can I just very quickly finish by saying that, of course, I have lived through I can remember the last high inflation era, which was the 70s, and it's a very, very horrible thing to go through. Actually,
it is. We did it here in the United States. I grew up in it. I was, formative years for me was the depression of the 70s. I was born in 68. My mother had to go back to work. My parents were both effectively on fixed incomes as public servants, as civil servants. So do the math. It was hard. So
it was hard. I mean, I was born in 61, so that gives you I experienced it even more, and it's difficult to convey actually how embittering it is politically. I mean, middle class people really, really get very, very distressed after a certain point, and that does affect electoral prospects. But that doesn't mean you can't find ways through. I mean, people did find ways through in the 70s,
and you find those way. And you find that way through. The last thing I just want to say before we leave, it's about community. It's about building. You have to build a network of people with skills complementary to yours, and be willing and able to share with those you value and trust. This is how you will get through. The division of labor is contracting. Our tribes are getting smaller. Pick your tribe very carefully. do your very best, because it's really going to be hard.
Absolutely. But one other positive thing I will say is that it did create, as I said, a political shock eventually. Took a while to work through, but there was the political shock. I mean, Tom was talking about the Reagan-Volcker moment, which was much more important, for example, than what Thatcher was doing in Britain, to be straightforward about this. I mean, I was living through the time. But, and that was a decision that was made not just by power elites, but by middle class people, by people, that this had gone far enough. It had to stop. It had to be brought under control. And there was this huge sort of groundswell of feeling. And of course, it did bring it to an end. And it changed the world. The politics afterwards were completely different from the way they were before. And given the awful state of politics in the West for so many years now, a kind of cathartic shock like that, I'm not looking forward to it at all, but it might actually be, necessary in order to achieve a genuine stabilization. So we'll see.
That's my view as well. We're going to have to go through this. We can't avoid it. So
we can't avoid it.
And we'll come out the other side of it stronger.
Yes.
Sadly, but the Russians are our model for this.
Yes.
The Russians. What did you say? The Russians are
our model for this. They went through this in the 90s. They went through this.
Yes.
And that's why they're, frankly, guys, that's why they're going to beat these people now. The generation of people who were formed in the 1990s, their formative years in the 1990s. Why do you think Putin has such strong support?
Yeah.
Okay, he's an older generation. He's the guy been put in charge by the younger generation now to do exactly this.
Yes.
And these are hard people who have lived through privation, and they do not want to go through it again. And they see it very clearly. Alex, you've made this point to me the other day on that. The mood in Russia is we're willing to go through this. We will handle this. And the psychology of the United States and the West at this point, very fragile. We've been living way too easy for too long.
This is just to repeat the point, which is that this is anecdotal. When I spoke to Tom, that there was a sort of stiffening of the mood in Russia, that they'll see it through, but now it's starting to be confirmed, corroborated by opinion poll data, that they will, that Putin's popularity has been rising, and that there's a mood in the in the electorate, that they're among the Russian population, that they're under attack, they're under siege. They will deal with it. They will cope with it. They've done it before, and they will see it through.
And they trust their leadership, and we don't.
And they trust their leadership, and we don't. Exactly.
Yeah, they trust their leadership, and it seems like they have an answer. They have a response for every single action that the EU and the Biden White House threw at them.
Yes,
it really does. And you could take the Visa MasterCard as a very simple example. Visa MasterCard pulled out, and the next day, MasterCard and
Union Pay
was up and running.
One last point. This gets back to that, and then one last point. Ready? And this is what not being in debt and having a high cash reserves gives you. Russia's doing at a national level what you should be doing.
Yeah,
you prepare for the future and for hard times that you see coming by having a strong balance sheet at home.
Yes.
If you have a strong balance sheet at home, you can weather almost anything. I've weathered multiple bouts of multi-year unemployment or marginal employment because I didn't have a mortgage.
Yeah.
Because I built my house and then, reaped the benefit of not having a $200,000 mortgage, but having a $75,000 mortgage. Paid it off.
Yeah.
And then I was able to do this. And that's having lived through that, what the Russians are doing is exactly that. That's why I could see, and I could see them building this for the last 10 years. So, all right. I mean, that's the key, but the indebted nations don't have that option, and they can put a lot of pressure on the leverage within our system, but that's a different discussion for a different day.
Yeah.
Yes.
You're talking pretty much all of Europe, Tom, the indebted nations. All right. We will leave it there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We will leave it there. Tom, it's been a joy to have you on the Duran. And just to say again, welcome to the Duran.
appreciate it, guys. I'm happy. I know this is long overdue that we've been trying to get this done for a long time, and I'm huge fans of your work, and what you're doing is so very freaking important. And there's no doubt that what you guys have built and what you guys have done is truly impressive. And my hat's off to you, and we'll do this again when we can.
Absolutely. Tom, once again, where can people reach you? Once again,
TomLuongo.me, Twitter, TFL1728, Patreon /Gold Goats and Guns. Make it simple.
The great Tom Luongo, everybody. Alexander, thank you very much. To our moderators, everyone in the chat, thank you very much. To everyone that sent us super chats, thank you very much. We will answer all those super chats in a dedicated video, so just keep that in mind. We'll get to everybody's questions. And while we're speaking about questions, Alexander is going to be doing a Q&A on locals, the Duran.locals.com, 19 o'clock London time.
Exactly.
Correct?
Yeah.
19 o'clock London time.
Correct.
You will be able to give some questions to Alexander as well. Odyssey, BitChute, Rumble, Super U, our great community on locals, and everybody here on YouTube as well. Thank you very much, guys. Take care.
Okay.